What is feminism? And will the real feminists please stand up? Say the word feminist in a room full of people, and many of those people are going to have different ideas of what's being talked about. So today, let's try to get a baseline understanding of what I mean when I refer to feminism. After all, if the words that we're using don't have a shared meaning so we understand each other, then we're not actually communicating, so much as verbally brawling. Before anything else, let's emphasize that we're talking about feminism and not feminists. The first is an ideology, which can be demonstrably defined. The latter are individuals who have their own varying opinions and motives and may or may not accurately represent the movement. There's, of course, first wave feminism, the 1910s to the 1950s, which began with the suffragettes, focused on things like the vote and political candidacy. There's a second wave, 60s to 80s, focused on things like reproductive rights, so-called, and getting women into male-dominated spaces. Third wave, 90s to 2008, they would say it focused on individualism and diversity. And fourth wave, roughly 2008 to present day, probably really took off around 2012 thanks to social media, and was all about this topic of sexual harassment and assault. Many different women call themselves feminists, right? They're the founders who as a whole fought to get women out of the home, even in the movement's earliest years. They saw the role of wife and mother as small, unimportant, and oppressive. Betty Friedan said that when a woman gets married, she becomes a semi-person. And a startling number of them promoted male genocide, basically. Women like Mary Daly and Sally Miller Gearhart, who said that we need to reduce males to 10% of the world's population. These women also actively promoted lesbianism, while viewing heterosexual women as traitors to our gender, as we are quite literally sleeping with the enemy. They called us male-identified women, and fought for a world of women-identified women. This phrase is in many of the early writings. Lesbian feminism, which was most advocated in the 70s and 80s, encouraged the general female population to become lesbians. Interesting, since we now believe that you can't choose who you're attracted to. And they asserted that lesbianism is the logical conclusion of feminism. There I would not necessarily disagree. For those of you who may be thinking that these were just a few women on the fringes of feminism, I know of at least 15 women who were well-known major leaders of this particular movement. Then there are the feminist academics, who teach, at best, a one-sided version of women's history, largely ignore and deny biology and science, and emphasize the ubiquitous presence of the patriarchy and male privilege. This idea that women in the West still do not have equality, and must constantly fight not to be oppressed and taken advantage of. They majorly confuse equal opportunity with equal outcome. And of course, there are the coffee shop feminists, so-called. Normal, intelligent, but misinformed women who think feminism is about this vaguely defined concept of girl power, women supporting women, a club or a clique that their mothers and grandmothers fondly espoused, and in carrying on the tradition, so do they. Their education on feminism's goals, roots, and history is usually relegated to a cursory overview during a high school history class or a women's studies course in college, at most. Of course, these are very general categories with quite a bit of overlap between them. That's why we need to look at the movement as a whole and at its core, versus individual feminists, a few of which may have even had more noble aims. Well, I'm a feminist and I don't believe fill in the blank. I hear this all the time. That's great, and you're entitled to your beliefs. But you, as an individual, don't get to define what feminism is. This applies to any ideology, organization, or religion. I'm a Christian, as most of you know, but I don't get to say that I or anyone else is what Christianity is really about. To know that, we need to look at Christianity's founder, Jesus, those who first established the church, the apostles, and its writings, or holy book, the Bible. The point is, as it relates here to feminism, you didn't create the movement, and you don't run it now. There's zero doubt that feminism is deeply divided over a whole host of issues, and it can be extremely confusing to those looking on. One kind of feminism says strippers are pawns of the exploitative patriarchy. Another kind says that sex work of all kinds is the ultimate female empowerment, liberating women to use their sexuality as they wish. I know feminists who wear gobs of makeup and feminists who wear none, and both attribute their choices to feminism. Many feminists insist that feminism stands for the rights of women to be whatever they want to be, including homemakers, whereas feminism's founders and those in its current upper echelons strongly disagree, asserting that feminism is about getting women out of the home and into the glorious realm of career. Intersectional feminists embrace the transgender crowd, whereas those now being called TERFs, or trans-exclusionary radical feminists, do not accept trans women as being women. By the way, that's another interesting study. Ideologically and politically, feminist activists and trans activists are on the same side. But feminism makes its demands based on gender. So if gender is fluid, what kind of a case does it really have? This explains why feminism would exclude transgender people. We could go on and on and on with examples of this disunity. So, there's a huge range within the ideology of feminism when it comes to what feminists believe specifically, to the point that there are very contradictory movements within it that oppose each other strongly. But one thing all factions of feminism have in common is the ultimate belief that women as a whole are oppressed, or some form and degree of patriarchy theory. Patriarchy theory categorizes an entire class of people, males, as historically oppressive, innately toxic potential rapists who, if nothing else, hold all the power and have held and continue to hold women back in society. So sure, feminism doesn't hate men. It just sees them as both the enemy and the competition, opposes them continually, ignores their colossal sacrifices and contributions to history and humanity at large, turns a blind eye to the societal prejudices and legislative injustices that they currently face, doesn't give a hoot what they need or want, and assigns to them all the guilt for everything that women and men and children have ever suffered throughout history. This is undeniable. Feminism literally cannot exist without a victim complex. Every goal of the women's liberation movement was accomplished by the year 1970. But we are, they still say, victims of everything from masculinity itself to the mythical and discredited gender wage gap. The fact is, considerably more women and girls than men and boys go to and graduate high school and college, go to more prestigious colleges, hold more doctorate degrees, hold more manager positions in the workplace. Whereas males in school are drugged in droves for behavior that used to be considered normal. Males are the ones in the middle of a depression and obesity epidemic. They receive 63% longer prison sentences for committing the exact same crimes as women. Yes, you heard that right. And they account for 77 to 80% of suicides. 73% of suicides are white males. But we women are, they say, the underdogs of our society still. We are treated like second-class citizens. That's why we need affirmative action and gender quotas. See, feminism needs victimhood. It's built upon it. Where there is no victimhood, feminism simply ceases to exist. So there you go. That's feminism, simplistically, but fundamentally. A belief in patriarchy theory and victimhood, repackaged and relabeled as a quest for equality. If you're thinking that I exaggerate or that I portray feminism too harshly, I invite you to come along with me here on my channel as together we examine the points I've made and turn back the pages of time to discover what life was really like during feminism's fledgling years and up until present day. George Orwell said that the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. We are destroying ourselves as a culture. And part of the reason for that is that we have swallowed hook, line, and sinker a version of our own history that leaves out so much crucial information and pits people against one another based on inflated and even fabricated injustices. If you're willing to stick with me here, you may be surprised and you may learn something. I know I have. To all my subscribers, thank you for liking and sharing my content to get the word out. To my supporters and opponents alike, You never cease to inspire me and encourage me, touch my heart, spur me on, and remind me of exactly why I and so many other anti feminists do what we do. Thank you.